Hi everybody, I'm Rich Helvey. I'm the lead animator over at Access Hollywood. In this program we're going to be teaching you some techniques to apply to your own flying logos, and we're going to be teaching you how to make your type look as good as it possibly can. We're going to be animating glints, we're going to be making sure that everything loops properly, and we're going to learn a lot. So let's get started. So the first thing that you have to deal with when you're doing a flying logo is your type. You're working with letters. So we're going to work with one individual letter right now, and we're going to model it, and I'm going to show you different ways that you can bevel it and different ways that you can make it look really cool just in the modeling stage. Then after that we'll move over, we'll surface it, light it, make it reflective and things like that. A lot of people, when they have their flying type, they extrude it, they bevel it, they're done. But you kind of need to know why you're extruding, why you're beveling. So let's start with just a letter. We're just going to start with a G right now because that has nice curves, it's got straight lines, and it should let me show you a few things. Now first off, with just your extrusions, are you going for just a short little extrusion? Something just enough to give it so you catch a little bit of light on that edge? Or do you want to do something crazy where you've got a real big extension? You're going to be looking at it like this and you want to go for that really dramatic effect. It's really important to make that decision and to get it right. If it's too big of an extrusion, it might look silly. So we're just going to go with this basic one right now. I'm going to leave this as our base type. We're going to copy it, paste it into another layer so I can work on it. Now I'll select the first face of it, use B for the bevel tool. And we're just going to go with a basic 45-degree angle bevel here. This is a nice small one. You see, by making it so small, I'm avoiding what happens when they cross over. You have those issues. We're not going to do that. We're going to keep it small. And this gives us a very simple look. You can see even just using the default modeler setup with its default light, you can see why you use a bevel. The face is dark, the edge is a little bit lighter because it's catching some light, but the bevel is really catching the light. And down here, and it just helps to emphasize the shape of your letter. It's going to help your eye see what the letter is, and it's going to make it look more interesting. However, there's different ways that you can use that bevel to the best effect. Right here, very simple, very boring. Another thing you can do, we'll copy that, paste, make another version of it. You can do still simple, but we'll make it even bigger. We'll go for a really large bevel. Now you see I'm having this error, so I have to go in here and fix this really quickly. I'll just drag these points out of the way here. Drag this guy up there. And basically make it so that the letter is working properly again. Like so. It's a tedious job, but you're going to have to get used to it if you're going to be beveling type. Now that's pretty good. Now you can see with a thicker bevel like this, it changes the feel of the letter. The letter doesn't feel as bold necessarily because the actual face of it is thinner. And your bevels are going to stand out a lot more. Now the one thing that's could give you a problem with these smaller bevels is if you make it too small, then if this G is going to wind up on the screen and it's really going to wind up, like that big, you may not necessarily even ever see that bevel once anti-aliasing gets into effect and everything. If we use a larger bevel with it, you're more likely to see that edge. So when you're making fine details like that, make sure that you're actually making it large enough that you're actually going to see it. So this time we're going to try to round off the bevels a little bit. This will soften the faces, and it'll kind of give your type, it'll make it a little bit more fun looking, not quite so monolithic like big hard cut bevels. So what we're going to do is we're going to be doing a number of different bevels, one right after the other. The problem is with the default setup with Lightwave, as you can see, I don't have very fine control over where my bevel is working. You see it's making some pretty big jumps there when I try to do it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit D, go into my display options, over under units, I can change my grid snap from standard to either none or fine. Now, see, I have a little bit more control over it, a little finer control. And if I zoom in even closer, you'll see that I have even more control. So I can really get the values that I want. So let's zoom out so that I have a good idea of what we're doing. Get this kind of from the side, and then we'll just start beveling. So we're going to make a big shift with a very small offset. Then we'll right mouse button and we'll do it again. Less of a shift, a little bit more of an offset. And so forth. Now you notice that I'm really having an issue here. Since I've been doing multiple bevels, this error has been building up. I can go in there, I can drag the points around, I can make it all good. But let's just look at the rest of the letter for a second. So you can see here that once I turn smoothing on, that's going to be a pretty good rounded edge there. However, I still have to deal with that. And if you've got a lot of type, you're going to have to deal with this a lot. So what's another way to round off the edges? Well, you can use a tool that doesn't get used as much as it should. It's called rail bevel. In this case, I'm going to put a G in there. In this case, we don't want the extrusion because of the way rail bevel works. So we'll select the face, select everybody else, get rid of them. We just have this. The way rail bevel works is by taking a background layer. We'll use the pen tool, and we'll start here on the x-axis. Imagine that your type goes off this way. This is one face of your type. This is going to be an extrusion out here, sort of like and it'll be an extrusion, a bevel. It's a profile. So we'll just add some points like this, and we're done. Now in this case, you would have one face of type here, the front of it, say the back of it would be here. This would be like your bevel. This would be like your extrusion. This is a real simple case. We can get more interesting later. Let's just see how this works. We'll go to our G, we'll put our profile in the background, and we'll go up to multiply and select the rail bevel command. Now as we drag back and forth, we extrude it farther. And by dragging up and down, you're making that profile thicker or thinner. Now this is different from the normal bevel command because you see it's beveling out. It's adding geometry on the outside, whereas our regular bevel tool was sucking in and making the face of our letter smaller. And with rail bevel, our letters will always be the face of the letters will always be the same size. Okay, so that's kind of fun. Let's make a more interesting rail to bevel off of. In this case, we're going to make this one kind of curved. Alright, so now we're going to have sort of a curved edge in the back and a curved edge in the front. And we'll get the face of our G, copy that, put that into a new layer, have our rail in the background, and this time when we rail bevel, you'll see we've got this nice curved edge to our type. I mean, that's nice curved type, and it was that easy. Now, there's a problem with rail bevel though. Actually, there's a few of them. The first one is that when you rail bevel, just like a regular bevel, it's just taking that face and moving it. It doesn't know that you want to keep a face on the back side. So you can see it's empty back there. There's nothing there. That's going to be a problem for us. So what we really want to do is we want to start with our original letter. We're going to flip it so it's facing backwards. We're going to copy it, and that way we're saving it in a buffer. Flip it back the right way. And now we're going to apply rail bevel to it. And now when we paste it, we put that flipped version back into the back of the letter. And now we do a merge points to meld the two together so it's one complete object. And there you go. We'll F2 and center it. And that's our nice curve thing. Now what's another problem with rail bevel? Well, let's say that we had a rail built like this. Instead of using the pen tool, I'm just going to use the add points tool. Let's say you started off and you had one that was just kind of a, you know, a basic shape like this. It starts with a straight edge for your bevel, an extrusion, another straight bevel. And what does that look like? Go to an empty layer, we'll paste our G in there, flip it. We'll go to rail bevel, have our rail in the background, and we'll do this. Okay, that's what it looks like. To undo that, now let's say we didn't want these sharp edges, we wanted some curves in there. Okay, so we'll make this guy, you know, kind of round it off. And we'll even go crazy and we'll round it up and do all kinds of wacky stuff. Okay. When we use rail bevel this time, it doesn't know what to do exactly. It's basing the bevel off of the order that you draw the points. So we're not getting a very smooth curve. It starts to curve and then it jumps and then it jumps again and it goes back and forth, and it doesn't look very nice. If we wanted this to really look like this, what we have to do is go in here and we have to force Modeler to know what point order we're doing. We select this guy, cut it, paste it, select the next one, cut it, paste, cut, paste, cut, paste, and so on. Because since you can do rail bevel with just points, the only way it knows how to build it is based on what point you built first. It can't go off of, well, this is lower, so it must come first, because here we're looping up above and coming back around, and it would get all confused. So now when we rail bevel this guy, it's a little bit more like what we want it to do. You can see in there, it comes forward off the face, cuts in, has a little extra bevel there. On the back side, it has our weird little chunks cut out of it. So that's the second weird thing you have to know about rail bevel. The third weird thing you have to know about rail bevel is how it deals with circles and anytime when you have a loop. Instead of a G, this time we're going to use an O. It has a big hole cut in it. We'll make a very simple rail, like that. Okay, go back into here, we'll do the flip thing, copy it, flip it back. Now we'll get ready to bevel it. We'll go ahead, and it looks fine here, except if you notice, we have a problem down here. Let me blow this up big so you can see it. This is not what we want. You see, our edge comes around like this and then overshoots and cuts into the other side of the O for some strange reason, and it happens on the other side too. This gives us this weird notch cut out of it there. This will happen anytime you have anything where there's a hole cut out of it. Where Modeler sticks this little seam in there that gives it access to the hole, rail bevel is going to screw up. The way to get around this is to do two rail bevels and do the outside of your letter is one rail bevel, inside is another. So we want to separate the outside of the O and the inside of the O, and the easiest way to do that is to make a solid box or just a plane back there. Flip it so we can see it. We're going to use the template drill. We're going to slice it along the z-axis. That's going to take every edge and cut it. We can get rid of this outside polygon. We don't need that at all. Then we can select just the inside polygon. We'll cut it out of there, paste it into here. And now we have an O, but we don't need these inside polygons here. And then select the point that they're connected to. Hit Control W to weld them all. So we have a big circle on the outside, and we have a smaller circle that's the inside. First thing we'll do is rail bevel the outside guy. We're going to do the flip, copy, flip thing. We do that. Rail bevel it, and let's just, for the sake of things, we'll make this a shift of 50 and an inset of -20. you're going to want to have your numeric panel up when you're doing this so that you can remember these numbers. Shift to 50, inset -20. Okay, so we did that one. So now we're on the inside part of the O. We do the flip, copy flipped, we're going to rail bevel, and make sure that our shift is at 50. And our inset this time, instead of being -20, we're going to make it +20 because it's the opposite of, and since it's the inside part, it's on an outside face. Okay, there we go, and we paste that face in. Now how do we combine these two? We've got this guy and this guy. Well, it's actually pretty easy. What we do is we select the faces here, cut them out, put them into a new layer. Take your outside layer, put just the faces on the inside. We're going to do another template drill. This time we're going to do a tunnel. So we cut out an opening. Sometimes it doesn't actually get rid of the opening, so we have to do it ourselves. Then we go to this part. Remember, this is the rail bevel for the inside faces. We have to flip them so they're facing the other way. Cut them out, paste them into our O, and there you go. Kind of an involved process, but if you notice, we don't have any issues down here. This looks nice and clean. It's very good. No problems. Now we can clean ourselves up, get rid of that. We don't need that. And there we go. It seems like a lot of work, but it's actually not that bad. Okay, so let's just clean up our layers a little bit here. We have a basic letter. We have one with a small bevel, larger bevel, a sort of a rounded bevel, a fat bevel on the outside. Here's one of our templates for the rail bevel. We can get rid of that. Another template. Here's a rounded version. We'll copy that into there. Let's get rid of all these templates. I can get rid of that too. Okay, so now we're cleaned up a little bit. We have a bunch of different versions. So now we're going to surface our objects and name the layers at the same time. Normally, you want to get in the habit of doing this as you're building instead of making a whole mess of layers and then doing it, but I was showing you other stuff, so we're going to do it now. We'll just name these layers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. This will make it a little easier to deal with when we're in layout. And we're going to name our surfaces now, and each object is going to have a separate set of surfaces, so I can surface them differently once we get into layout, and you can see how different things are affecting different letters. But basically you want to make your face, this is going to be one face, and your edges, one edge. This guy doesn't have any bevels, so we can't surface them. So now we'll move on to the second one. We'll select the face, Q, change this one to 2 face. We'll hide that polygon, select these bevels, Q, 2 bevel, hide those, and this one is 2 edge, and so forth and so on. Sometimes there's not enough room to try to do a lasso select around something, and you wind up accidentally catching polygons that are part of the bevel. So one thing you can do is just click on it up in your perspective view. It makes it easier to select. So we'll call this one 3 face. We'll hide that guy. Now select the bevels, 3 bevel, hide them, 3 edge. Okay. Now this guy, he's got the curves on him. And we need to fix this error in here. So we'll do that real quick. drag these silly points all over the place and make it sort of look like what we want it to look like. Okay, so now we select that guy, and this is going to be the face, and our bevel is curved, so we're going to have more guys in there. That's 4 bevel. Okay, then we'll move on. We'll do the same thing here. Select that main one. Level 5 face. Hide it. Okay, now this one's a little bit more complicated because if we zoom in tight on things, you'll kind of see what we've got here. We've got our face is this guy. That's easy enough. We can just call that 6 face. We'll hide him. And then see, we've kind of got this little, we've got an edge out here that's like an outline. And then we've also got this sort of inset bevel here. And in this case, I think it would be fun to have this be a separate surface from these guys out here. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we'll do is we'll bring back the face, select it, and use Shift curly brackets to extend our selection in, and we'll go to there, and then we use our statistics panel here to select everything with the surface of 6 face, and we're going to subtract it from our selection. So now all we have is that edge, and we'll call this one 6 inset bevel, like that. We'll hide that, and we'll hide our face. We can close polygon statistics. Now we'll grab these guys and call them 6 bevels. Well, we'll call them 6 outline bevels. Okay, hide them. And we're not going to be messing around with the backside right now, so I'm not going to worry about the fact that we've got yet another bevel back there. So we're just going to call this 6 edges. Bring everybody back. Now move on. Now this is the O. So go here. That's 7 face. And again, I'm not worrying about the fact that I've got stuff on the back side. And here's a simpler O. A face. Okay, so now we're just going to save the object so that we have access to it in layout. We call this, beveled letters. Like that. And we'll jump over here into layout and bring them all in. Beveled letters. Okay, for right now we want to spread them out, so we'll just move everybody someplace where we can sort of see them all. And where they're not overlapping too badly. Like that. We'll go back to the camera view. And we're going to have to move the camera around so we get a good angle on things. I'm going to be up here like this because this will give us a good, reasonable idea of what the faces are going to look like and the bevels and the edges. We can see them all at once. Okay, the first thing we want to do when you're setting up your surfacing is figure out your smoothing. What's going to be smooth, what's not smooth, because you can see right here that you've got, ugly little jaggy gradations and stuff. So we'll go into the surface editor. For right now, we've got a bunch of surfaces. So we'll just select them all, hit smoothing, and it's going to smooth everything. The smoothing angle in Lightwave is set to 89.53 for some silly reason. Anytime you have 2 polygons and their angle is going to be less than this, it's going to smooth it over and it's going to try to make it seem like it's a nice smooth surface. But to me, this is really high as a default. I wish they would change this, because look what it's doing to this object in particular. If we turn it off, we see that you've got an edge, a bevel, and a face. And this should be a pretty sharp bevel there. You turn on smoothing, and it just blobs the whole thing all out. So if we turn this down to, say, 30, what it'll do is it gives us that nice crisp edge again, and yet it smooths out our bevel and the edges here, but we really have distinct faces. Same thing goes for everything else. Now let's move surface editor out of the way, and you can see what it's doing for everybody. This guy seems to be having some sort of an issue, so let's turn off smoothing again, see what's going on. Okay, notice how his hard bevels are very, very short. So a smoothing angle of 30 might not be good for him. We'll try a 15. 15 is going to work. And if you look around at everybody else, we still get smooth gradations on the rest of your letters everywhere. So 15 is good. You want to keep this low enough that your edges are, nicely defined, but you want to keep it high enough that your surfaces that are supposed to be curved are actually curved. If we turned it down to 5, we're seeing breaks in the polygons here. So we'll put it up to 15, like that. Now the next thing you want to do is, right now we're just lighting this with just a basic light, so we're not worrying about that. We're just worrying about our surfacing. And our diffuse is set at 100%. We want to add some shine, make it sparkle. So we're going to add some specularity here. And you can't really see it too well on the OpenGL, but look at this letter right here. When it's down at 0, it's kind of dull. Bring it up to 100%, you get a nice shine. Glossiness is going to affect how tight or loose that shine is. With a 0%, everything's blown out. At 100, it's a little bit too tight. I usually like to keep it around 50 when I first start out. Let's just do an F9, see how this looks. Alright, so you can see we're getting some nice glints there. And this is gonna be a tricky letter. We're gonna have to use anti-aliasing up pretty high on this guy, because it's got those fine details like I was talking about. If this thing gets too small on the screen, all that work that we did is gonna get ugly on us. But let's turn on reflection now for our next little bit of shininess. We're going to turn on ray trace reflections. And you see that didn't take any longer than the other version, but we're going to be getting cool reflections from other letters and things in here, along the faces, along the edges. Some neat little effects all over the place. But it doesn't quite look right. When you're reflecting things, you need an environment to reflect into. So the easiest way to do that is just add a reflection map. I'm going to do that with a spherical map. We'll load an image real quick. And one of the nice ones is glare streaks. Ooh, okay. Here we go. This is a good sample. Now, just with a couple little tweaks, I've got these bright, shiny letters that, they're a little glossy on the face here, but they're really shiny. We're really getting some good effects in there. But they're not. There's nothing really special about them yet. And also, some of these, like these guys, are really getting blown out. So one of the things that I like to do is, instead of just cranking specularity and reflection up to 100, I'll put these back down to 0 for now. I'll add a texture, and I'll use a gradient based off the incident angle, so that as it's more glancing from the camera, we're going to have it be at 100%. When you're looking at it straight on, it's at 0. We'll copy this guy, we'll put him into the reflection channel. Now the face isn't quite so blown out, and you see you get some nice highlights here. This is particularly looking really cool. Now, notice that we have these weird edges on this object here. That's because it's trying to smooth over that face, but you've got this polygon that's made out of lots of different points here, and Lightwave doesn't really know how to smooth it. So we'll hide these guys, select this guy again, find out which number he was. He was number 4. Let's go see if we can't fix that. Number 4. So we'll zoom in, select the face, and now we do a bevel with just an itty bitty little inset, nothing more. And we're going to synchronize layout, go back into layout, and now if the hub is working, it should render better. Now all those errors are gone. Okay, by adding that extra bevel, what we've done is we've taken this error that's occurring here with this weird line going in there, and by adding that little tiny bevel, we've actually isolated it. So that error is occurring just in that little bevel, that little ring of polygons around the face. And so then the face is flat, and you can't see, because that polygon, that ring of polygons is so small, you can't see the error. We've basically hidden it from the viewer. It's still there, you just can't see it. Now we're going to start working with colors and figuring out how do we use color to make our logos look better. These are popping pretty well. They're nice and bright, and of course over black anything's going to look good. But what are some different types of things we can do with the colors? So we'll open up our surface editor here, and just for kicks, we'll start with a nice kind of gold, yellowy gold effect. That's a little too green. Like that, I like that. That's a nice letter. Nice and shiny. These are going to look really cool. But what if we take all the faces? And of course I renamed foreface incorrectly, but take the faces and we're going to make them a little bit darker. Now look at how the bevels are really popping, how they're really standing out. We can make that even more obvious by selecting all our bevels here. Make sure I got them all. We're going to take the specularity, take it beyond 100. We're going to take it up to 200, really make it bright. And we're going to do the same thing to our reflection. Okay, let's look at the difference here. This is extra bright, normal bright. It's subtle, but you can definitely see it. Watch especially around in here where we're catching some good reflections. That's kind of a neat effect. Okay. Now, another thing we can do is we can take these edges and instead of making them gold, we can have them stand off, be like a nice silver, and that's kind of a cool effect. And notice how this one, it's not looking quite as bad anymore. When you separate the colors like this and you have different surfaces, it's easier to see where you're really supposed to be defined everything. Okay. Now, this reflection map that we've got going on here, this glare streaks, it's interesting. It's kind of got these nice shiny little effect going on here, and you get good highlights. And this is gonna be a good effect if you want gleams and shines to go across. Another thing you can do, close this temporarily, close these guys, is we can use HDRs, which you've seen before. For instance, this beach probe. We're going to apply this using the special environment image world plugin. And then we have to go back into the surface editor and make sure that everything is set. Set the spherical map to backdrop. Rid this guy out. And now that's a completely different kind of shine. Put it back on spherical map. So depending on what you're going for, different reflection maps, different ways of reflecting the environment around you are going to have completely different effects. You know, this kind of gives you more of a dark feel. There's more of dark and dramatic, whereas this just gives you really bright, glowy letters. Okay, well, what if you like some of these reflection effects on parts of it, but some of it on others? Well, this is why we've selected and named all our surfaces, all our edges and bevels and faces separately. Because, for instance, let's say we want the edges of our objects to be this spherical map with the streaks on it. And then we want all the bevels to be brighter and more glowy. So we want them to be the backdrop. So now it's kind of a mix of the two. As you can see here, especially on this guy, you can see there's the horizon line, and you can get a good feel for that there's some blue in there, there's some other colors, and yet our edges still have that shiny gloss like effect. And our faces are using that same reflection map. So that's one way, that's one reason why you want to separate your faces, your bevels. We can also give them different colors. It just gives you a lot more control over everything that you're doing if you separate them out into different surfaces. Now, we don't have to have these be gold either. Gold just happens to be a nice, pretty color for stuff, but you can get away with just about anything. You know, I can do just plain white. We get some interesting colors. The trick is that you want to make sure that the faces of your letters are standing off from the bevels and from your edges somewhat. We get these nice, sharp, bright highlights in here. It really makes this letter really easy to see. This one is falling apart. It's a little harder to see. There's no added reflection around the edge there like there is here. And what's the difference between those two letters? Well, let's find out. We'll zoom in on them with the camera here. Okay. This O has more of that rounded edge to it. And this one was a sharper bevel. Let's isolate just those two objects. So that's 8 and 7. We'll take these guys, hide them from the camera, and hide them from that. Now we'll move them up side by side so we can get a better idea of why do you want a rounded bevel in one case and why do you want a flat bevel in another. Okay. So look at the difference here. On this bevel, you see we get this big highlight. Actually, with this reflection map, we're going to get big highlights everywhere. So why don't I change that real quick? We're going to make everybody be a spherical map. Everybody's going to use these glares. Okay, here we go. On the flat bevel, you can see that most of the time it's pretty much the same color all the way around. We get some brightness. There's a highlight. There's a little bit of one there, and there's some down here too. But for the most part, you're not catching any details. On the rounded one, you get a highlight, a highlight, a highlight, highlights all over the place. And in here, same thing. You get this real broad strokes with a few highlights here and there. With the rounded edge, you get distorted highlights all over the place. So it really depends on how complex you want these highlights to be. Do you want all this detail, all this noisy stuff in there, or do you want it to be more, you know, a simple effect where every now and then you get a really bright shine going through there? It's really up to you. It's up to the effect that you're trying to do. Now, what if you've got this rounded edge here, or that's the effect that you're going for, but you were dumb and you modeled it with only a simple bevel like this? what are you going to do? Well, you can try to fix it. Let's go back into Modeler real quick. We'll find the simple letter O, this one. Let's make a copy of it here. We'll call this one number 9. Okay, we want to take this sharp edge right here, and we want it to be more of a round effect, so we can catch more bevels. What I like to do is I'll select these guys, go up to Construct, find Bandsaw, we'll enable Divide. This will take the polygons that are running in this direction and it'll slice them right down the middle, like that. When we go to Points mode, it's selected those new points that it's made. So we can take them and use the Move tool, move the whole thing out a little bit, like that. And now we'll go back to Polygon mode, we'll select these guys, we'll go back to Bandsaw, and we'll do the same thing again. Select our points, move them out. Alright, so we'll do this one last time. We'll grab these polygons here, go to Bandsaw, hit OK, go back to points, and we'll move them just a little bit. And this suddenly takes us from our hard edge like that to a rounded edge. That easy. Now if you built rounded and you wanted to go to a straight edge, that's a little bit more difficult to do because you have to go in and select each row of points and move them. Instead of moving them towards the face, you need to move them away from the face. So now that we've seen how to do like really shiny metals and stuff, what if you don't want to do that? Let's make some glass instead. So for this one, I'm going to start and I'll make our letter O, like that. I'm going to center it and give it an extrusion. Give it some bevels, like so. Okay. And we're going to name these, and this is layer 10 face. Subtract that out. We're going to grab the bevels and finally do the edge. Okay. Now the thing about Lightwave and the way it does glass and transparency is that it's designed to ray trace really quickly. And unfortunately, what that means is that sometimes it's not always the smartest thing in the world. It is very customizable though. In Lightwave, if you have an object, we'll use a simple cube for reference here. If you have an object like this, and let's say it's tracing a ray from out here and it's coming into the box. Well, it's going to hit this face, this front face, and it's going to go, okay, I've now gone into a transparent thing. And it's going to look at the index of refraction, and it's going to know it's got to bend that ray a little bit. So instead of shooting down like this, it's going to shoot across. Alright, so it gets to the back face here, and it's shooting across. And since the normal is pointing in the same direction that the ray is traveling, the ray never sees this polygon. So it never understands when it passes out that it's gone outside of the box. So what we have to do is tell the ray somehow that it's going to go outside. In order to do that, we take these polygons and copy them, and then we flip them so now they're all facing inward. So now as the ray travels along, it's going to hit this guy and go, oh, I'm entering a new medium. That means we're going to have to give this a new surface. We're going to have to call this glass to air or something like that. Something so that you remember that it's coming from glass and it's going into the air. And now we're just going to paste the original outside versions back on. And if we merge all our points, we should be fine. So now if you notice, every edge has a front side and a back side. And that's going to let our rays know when they're out here, I'm in the air. Okay, now I've gotten into our glass. It'll go to the other side. It'll hit the inward facing polygons. It'll go, okay, I'm exiting my glass and I'm going back out into the air. So it knows that it's got to bend that light ray twice. Another reason why you want to do this is if you have one object in front of another and they're both glass and they both have the same index of refraction, well, if you didn't have these inside polygons facing inward, your light ray would come in, say, okay, I've entered glass. My index of refraction is, say, 1.5. It'll go along, it'll exit the backside, but it doesn't know that it's exiting. It'll go along and it'll hit our next object, which would be right here. It'll enter that glass and go, okay, my index of refraction is now 1.5. But it already was 1.5 when it entered here. So it doesn't realize it has to bend yet again. You wind up getting really flat objects. You don't get a lot of the cool distortions one after the other as the ray enters and exits different pieces of glass. So we're going to fix our piece of type now to do the same thing. Right now we've got this object here. We need to copy it. We've already named the surface, so we'll copy it and then we'll flip it. And we'll name this one glass to air. And we paste back the guys that we copied a second ago, merge all the points. This will keep us from getting ray tracing errors. And now we're ready to make this our glass object. Call that layer 10. Save the object and resync layout and go back to layout. Now let's close these guys. And I'm going to hide everybody but our new piece of glass. Alright. Now we'll take the camera, go down there, take a look at it, see what we want to do with him. Okay, and this is our piece of glass here. We want to take the diffuse down to 0. You're not going to see any diffuse on this guy right now. We're going to use the same gradient on our specularity that we used before. So we'll just paste that in there. We'll remove that layer. We're going to use the same gradient for our reflection as well. And then we're going to use the same gradient for the transparency, but we invert it so that where the reflectivity is high along the edges, it's going to be less transparent, so it'll be more solid around the edges. Where you're facing it dead on, it's not going to be very reflective, but you can see right through it. It's a little bit more of a realistic effect doing it that way. Also, we need to give this a refraction index. We'll give it a 1.5, and we'll smooth it out. Use the 30. And now we need to find our glass to air surface down here. Basically, what we can do is we can copy our surfaces for the rest of the glass, paste it into here, and then we need to change our refraction to 1.0. And this is the thing that you really need to remember. You need to turn off ray tracing for these guys. Make it backdrop only. When you have two polygons facing each other, like these inside polygons are going to be, you're going to have a ray come in, go through this guy. It could bounce off here if you have reflection turn on. Hit this guy, bounce off him, go back, bounce a million times inside there. You get the hollow mirrors effect. It takes a lot longer to render that. If you turn off reflection ray tracing on your inward facing surfaces, the ray comes in and it just passes right through. It doesn't bounce back and forth. For the most part, it looks good enough. It's not the most realistic thing in the world, but at least it'll render in time that you'll get your job done. Okay, so now we're going to render out the glass, so we need to turn on ray trace refractions, and we're going to hit F9 and see what it looks like. Okay, that's kind of neat. You can see some distortions. You can see the inside surface where the light ray is exiting. You can actually see that. It's catching some reflections and stuff. If, for example, we had taken this glass to air, and if it didn't exist, which in effect we can simulate by changing the index of refraction to 1.5, and we render this. Let's look at the difference here. It's not quite the same. On this first one, we catch more highlights. We've refracted it differently. On this other one, it's boring. You're just kind of seeing right through it. It's not that exciting at all. So we want to put this guy back to 1.0. Now, that's an awfully bright environment we're using here. So we're going to switch this to ray tracing plus spherical map. Uses glare streaks. We're going to turn ray tracing off for that. Make sure that your glass to air is still getting ray traced refraction. There we go, that's kind of cool. And in fact, let's just turn off that backdrop altogether. Now there's some neat glass type there. Another reason why you have your glass to air as a separate surface is that we can change it. We can, let's say we can add diffuse to it. This will brighten up the insides a bit, because now light is striking the insides. This is without diffuse. This is with. It brightens it up a little bit. What if we change the color of it? Make it kind of greenish. There you go. Now you're getting color in just some areas of it. Not all over the place. Just some isolated hints of color right around like the edges and stuff where the light is barely hitting it. You can also turn on color highlights and color filter, and that's going to give it more of an emerald-like feel. Now what if we take our outside surfaces and give them an entirely different color? What's that going to do for us? Nothing, until, because we have no diffuse going on. If we turn up color highlights and color filter, and now we get this kind of mix of this gold green kind of effect. If we turn up the diffuse up here, there's a lot you can do with it. By having separate surfaces, we could take our bevels, for instance, and we could take the transparency and completely turn it off by turning off this texture. And now this kind of gives us a metal edge, a metal bevel around this type, around all this glass. And this effect, this glass type, really works well. If we were to take this, and let's add a couple clones to it. So we'll clone this like 3 times. And now let's, move them around so we have different versions of them. Kind of rotate them. Make this guy nice and big. Yeah, that's. You can see you're catching the other O back in there. You're getting some nice distorted effects. Good highlights all over the place. It's these are neat letters here. Change it even more. Now this blue here, the cyan, is mixing with the green and the gold, and we're getting really kind of sweet effects going on. It doesn't look like anything specifically that I've seen in person, but flying logos are not supposed to be like that. They're just supposed to be cool. I think we're entering into that state now. I really like when it gets all funky in there and stuff like that. Alright, so that's enough of making your type look beautiful. What if we want to not emphasize all this shininess and everything? And what if you really are going for more of that effect where you have something that's more like a 2D, 3D look? There's other things you can do besides build just, glossy, super high-tech type like that. Let's make another letter here. Center that guy. Just do a real quick bevel and emboss on this guy. like so. And this one is layer 11 face. Whoops. I'm going too fast. 11 bevel. And finally, 11 edge. Okay. Name that layer 11. Make sure it's centered. Save the object and synchronize layout. Go back into layout. Now we want to hide layer 10. Okay. Now all we're dealing with this time is number 11. Again, we'll set the smoothing to 30, and we'll give it some color, something like this, and we'll turn on specularity, but you'll see what I'm going to do to it in a second. All right, basic, boring, shiny type. It kind of looks flat because there's not a lot going on. There's no reflections, all that kind of stuff. But you know, those character animators are not the only ones who are allowed to use Super Cell Shader. You can do it too. Now that doesn't really do anything for me. You're getting your reflections, but you're losing all your detail around your bevels and your edges. So what we need to do is go into the Objects Properties panel and turn on some edges here. First off, we'll start with our silhouette edges. Make that like 2. Let's see how we're doing there. We're catching some in there. And do sharp creases. Here we go. Now it's starting to look a little bit more hand-drawn-ish. Probably want to make that a little bit larger. Okay. We've got a black background right here, so you can't see all of our edges. I'm going to change my backdrop real quick. Let's make another version of this blue. Like that. Now by putting that dark edge around it, it really highlights it, offsets it. These black edges, you can see they set off our bevels in there too as well. And yet we've got these hard edges. So it kind of looks like sort of a hand-drawn look. It's still definitely computer-generated, still 3D and all that, yet it's a different look. This edge around things is also very good to use, even if you're doing regular type. For instance, if I hide that guy, let's bring back, one of these guys here. We'll make sure he's in the center of things. So we'll reset him. See what he looks like. Okay. Nice shiny type. Very exciting. But if we really want to make sure that you can read it, we turn on silhouette edges. It gives us an edge around the outside. It's completely unrealistic. But see how this almost is blending into, even though these are completely different colors, it's almost blending in right there. By putting that black line around it, you define it, that this is my edge right there. Your eye isn't slowly sliding off of it or anything. This is my edge. You're also embracing the fact that this is 3D computer generated type. If this was a real object, obviously it wouldn't have a black edge around it like that. But you're not trying to be real. You want to make sure that you're legible, that you can actually read this. This is even more important if your logo is smaller, because very rarely you're going to just have a big old G in the middle of the screen. But if we take the camera, move the camera farther away, and let's do a render with this turned off. Okay, and now we're going to turn the silhouette edges back on again. It's it helps set it off from the background just a little bit. Now you're not going to want to do this all the time, but it's another effect that you can use to help make your type a little bit more legible. Sometimes you don't have control over what's going on in your background, so you're never going to know, is the editor comping my logo over light footage or dark footage, or you don't know. So you can't control, okay, I'll make bright type, and that'll always look good over dark footage. Well, that's good, but if you give them bright type and they give you bright footage, your logo is just going to be lost. So by putting an edge around it like this, you're helping to define it. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do right now is we're just going to animate a letter flying around the screen, and we're going to make sure that it loops properly. There's a lot of other aspects to a scene that you're going to want to make sure loop. Volumetric lights, textures, particles. We're going to do those a little bit later. Right now we just want very simple how to make a single object loop. So we're going to load in just one of my letters. We'll just load in a single G like that. And let's just position the camera somewhere. Say the camera's up here like this. We want this G to be catching lots of glints. One of the ways to do that is to spin it around in a circle. So if we go 360 degrees, obviously it's going to loop. So at frame 0, we're at 0. Frame 60, frame 60, we want to be at 360 degrees. This guy is going to spin around in circles. If we change our bounding box threshold to a little higher, we can actually watch it occur. Okay, that loops. But if there's one thing I hate, it's seeing the back side of a letter. Most of us would be able to read that that's a G, but it's still annoying to see. So how do you spin a letter around in a circle and still be able to read it all the time? The answer is to don't start it face on. Start it edge on like this. Go to our end of it. And we're going to set it back at 0, and we're going to finish edge on this way. So now it's going to rotate, and it's always facing towards us. There's a little bit of a hit because obviously we're looking at one side of the object, and then here it's a different, we have a rounded edge facing us. Now we have a hard edge facing us. But most of the times you can get away with this. That hit that you get when it gets to the loop point is, to me anyways, much less distracting than seeing the back side of a logo. Now what happens if the camera is not going to be staying in one position? Right here it's fine, the camera's in a good location, but what happens if over the course of your animation, we'll make this 300 frames, what if the camera has now moved, over here? So now if we have our object and we make sure that our rotation is repeating itself, as the camera moves, it gets worse and worse because the G is no longer facing us on its edge when it switches. You can see it switch more. So what do we do about that? Well, the easiest way to do it is add a null object for you. We're going to parent that G to the null object, like so. The null object, use the M for the motion panel, the null object is going to be targeted at the camera, but we don't want to do it on pitch. We only want the heading. So the null is now targeted to the camera, so it's always going to face the camera. Let me show you what that's going to do. We're going to get rid of the rotation on the G real quick. We're going to reset this guy. We'll get rid of this keyframe here, and we'll go over here. We're going to have to flip around the letter because of the way targeting works. It works in the positive Z, so it always flips your type around. A little weirdness about Lightwave. But as you can see, as the animation goes, your G is always facing the camera. This itself is a neat trick. It's kind of handy. You might want to use that someday. But what if you want that G to also be rotating? Well, we'll start off by having it face away from the camera like this at 270 degrees. We'll go back to 60. Rotate it around this way, and this one's going to be 90 degrees. Go into the graph editor, make sure we're looping again. Okay, yes we are. And now, as the camera flies around, not only is the G always facing us and rotating, but it's always flipping when it's edge on. It's always flipping right there when it's edge on. That's another nice little trick. Don't be afraid to parent objects to nulls and have the null be doing one thing. This is always going to keep your object facing the camera in a nice, neat, orderly manner. Okay, so what if you don't want your G to just be spinning around? What if, say, we're flying through a cloud of G's, or whatever your logo happens to be, and you want it to be continuously just flying through these things, almost like it's a star field passing us by. Well, let's make an object first. Start with a new object. Let's just create something simple. Let's go with the O, center it. I'll give it a little bit of an extrusion just so we can see that there's 3D to it, and center it. I'm not going to worry about bevels right now because we're not dealing with that. We're just dealing with the raw motion here. Now I want to make a cloud of these things. So in my layer here, I'm going to use the random points button, which is going to give us 100 points. That's good enough. And it just kind of scatters these points randomly through space. I'm going to use the point clone plus effect to take that O and have one version of it where every point is. But if I do it right now, all those O's are going to be very close together. So I need to space them out a little bit. And maybe a little bit more. That should be good. Now I'll take the O in the foreground, put the points in the background. Under the multiply tab, we go to point clone plus. We'll just accept all the defaults. And now we've got lots of little O's all over the place. So we can get rid of our points, and we'll just save this. Lots of O's. And we'll go back into layout here. Now let's add that object. Lots of O's, like that. Let's take a look at it. Alright, if we're the camera, we're going to put the camera back at its natural position at 0, 0, 0. It's embedded in this cloud. What we want to do is have that cloud move past us and just have this never-ending cycle of these O's flying by us. Maybe you're doing a SpaghettiOs commercial. So we've got our object, and what we want to do first off is we're going to go into bounding box mode because we're really interested in this front edge and the back edge. We're going to start off with it where the front edge is right on the same plane as the camera. And over the course of our animation, in this case 60 frames, it's going to move such that its back edge is right at the plane of the camera. So that in 60 frames, the camera will fly through one set of O's. Now what we do is we just clone that item, and clone it one time, make sure that we don't have any animation on it. So we reset its value, we get rid of the keyframe at 60 and we reset its position at 0. We're going to parent it to the first set of O's that are already moving, like that. And now what we want to do is we want to know how far back here do we move it. This is going to be our second set of O's that we run into. Bounding box mode is going to let us see what we're doing. We move it along Z so that its back edge and its front edge and the back edge of the first one meet up. Now, if we're looking through the camera, you'll see that as we go, we're zooming through one set of O's, and then we're going to the others. And watch this guy right here. As he's going, you see that we're always going to be flying right over that guy. Now, we have a new set popping into existence every time we go through it. We don't want to have to deal with that. What we're going to do is we're going to actually make another clone like this, and this one is going to be parented to the second version, which is automatically going to put us in the right position. Now as we fly through, you'll see as we get near the end that there's even more of them that are in the right position. We still have that problem of the guys in the back popping into existence. This is where your own decision-making process is going to have to take place. How far back do you want to actually be able to see these guys? If this is enough, then fine, we'll deal with that. If it's not, you just keep cloning these guys and parenting them and going farther, farther, farther back. So I'm going to use the fog to help dissolve this one in as it, instead of having it pop on. So I'm going to just turn on a nice linear fog, and then by going into our display preferences by hitting D, I can make sure that we're showing our fog circles. And you can see right around there, that's our fog circle, but it's a little tight right now. So we're going to take our maximum distance and move it out. I want that maximum distance to be right where the one that's going to pop into existence is just beyond that maximum distance. Then if you don't want a fog effect throughout the stuff that you can see, so you want to move your minimum distance, I usually will try to do it either just beyond our first pass or about halfway. You don't want to make it too close to your maximum distance, or it's just too abrupt of a transition, but about halfway through your second set of letters should be pretty good. Now, if we're looking at it in OpenGL in the camera view, we should be able to turn on OpenGL fog and have it take effect. And you'll see, hopefully, that you don't get any sudden pops from letters. It just loops correctly. Now if you notice, there's a little bit of a pause in the animation as it goes from frame 0 and frame 60. And that's not because Lightwave is reloading itself and starting the timer back at the beginning. What it is, this is Lightwave's way of dealing with making loops. If I'm on frame 0 and I set a keyframe, and frame 60 and set a keyframe, then when I render from frame 1 to 60, I know that it's going to loop, because my missing frame 0 is exactly the same as frame 60. So when I go 1 to 60 and then play back again, it's as if frame 1 is now frame 61. I don't want to go frame 60 and then frame 0, because those things are in the same position and you'll get that hit. If I were to set our initial frame to 1 and then run my simulation, you see there's no hit, there's no pause. So Lightwave has been very good from day one of realizing that people may have to do something like this, and that's one of the reasons why you set your initial keyframes on frame 0, because it makes sense. I want a 60 frame loop, so I'm working from 0 to 60. If my initial frame was frame 1 and I wanted a 60 frame loop, it would be a little bit more complicated to figure out, because I'd be working from 1 to 61. Most of us can subtract 1 from 61, and yet it still makes more sense to do it this way. Okay, so this is one way of looping lots of letters flying towards you. What if you've got, we'll clear the screen, clear the scene here, and let's actually bring back up the spinning rotating G. If we've got something like this, and it's going on, the G is rotating just fine, but notice that the camera obviously is not rotating, or is not looping. it's going from here and it's suddenly jumping to here. We want somehow our camera to get back to this position at frame 300 so that it loops a little bit more appropriately. There's a couple different ways you can do it. You can have the camera fly down to this position and sort of settle, and then fly back up and settle, and then fly back down. And let's see what that looks like. In this case, what we're going to have to do is make our animation twice as long, because it's going to take 10 seconds for the camera to get down here, and it's going to take another 10 seconds for it to get back. We want to be in exactly the same position at frame 600 as we are at frame 0. So we'll just say enter, make a keyframe at 600. Now we fly down, we kind of pause, we turn around, we go back up, and you'll see that it kind of has a hard bounce here. Let me do that again. It kind of bounces off there hard, not like down here. Notice down here at frame 300, we glide through it. Up here at 600, it takes kind of a hit. So what we need to do is take that camera and the graph editor. We want to make sure that we've got the proper tension and continuity and bias. If we set our behavior to repeat, you can see what's going on. Our camera position here at the very end, it's coming up and boom, it's taking a hard hit right there on everything. Even on our rotation, it's doing the same thing. A hard, it just, ouch, that would hurt. You'd get whiplash from that. The easiest way to take care of this is to select all our channels for the camera. We'll select the keyframes at the beginning, keyframes at the end, and set your tension to 1. And now, if we look at that, then we got nice smooth arcs going in there. What does this look like when we're moving? 300 is pretty much the same. And as we get closer to 600, we slow down, and we don't have that hard edge there. So that's how you make sure that your camera is going to loop. But sometimes you don't want to do this back and forth oscillation thing. What if most of your move wants to be just going down like that, but you have to still get back up there somehow? Well, in this case, instead of being 600 frames, we'll go back to having a 300 frame animation. And in this case, we're going to have it do some kind of move in the last 15 frames that gets us back up there. Most of the rest of the move is going to be the same sort of slow drift down, and then we'll do a quick motion back up there. So we'll go to frame 275. We'll just set a keyframe by hitting enter twice. And as you can see, that really shouldn't adjust, that shouldn't change our move much at all. The trick now is to go back to frame 0 and copy this onto frame 300. And now we'll fly through, we'll go down to 275 and we'll quickly zip back up to 300. We're going to have to make sure that these keyframes here have a tension of 1 as well. And we might even want to change the bias on our 275 so it's a little bit more of a linear move coming into it, and then we quickly swoop up and get back to where we were at the beginning. So we're going along and then zoop. Now to make that even more interesting, you can do things like go into the rotation and we'll add 360 degrees, 360 not 3600, onto our bank. Now what happens? Okay, now I need to set my keyframes, but you see at the very end we spin out all crazy. Why is it doing that at the beginning? Well, because if we just look at these two keyframes, you can see it's dipping down there. We want to increase the bias even more. So there's basically no change in the bias or in the rotation on its bank as it's flying down, and just at the very end we want to have that weird little flip. like that. That kind of masks what you're doing if there's any other weirdness, and it just gives you a little bit more excitement. Another thing you want to make sure that you're doing is you want to make sure that your loop is not too short. This is about as short as I would ever want to get, about 300 frames. If we were to make this shorter, for instance, by going into the scene editor and taking the camera, and instead of being at 300, we'll stretch it down. We'll stretch it down to 150. Let's see what that looks like. Now it's obviously going to move faster, but you see what happens is when it's shorter like that, you see the same thing over and over again far too often. And you can imagine what it would be like if we were even shorter than that. If it was 3 seconds, it would really get annoying. The motion doesn't quite work the same as it did before. So we'll stretch it back out to 300. The main important thing that you want to be paying attention to when you're doing motions like this is in your graph editor. You want to look at every channel, and you want to go to that point where it's going to be looping, and you want to make sure that your motion path is going in through there nice and smoothly. Otherwise you're going to have a hit. You also want to use nice even numbers. I've got a 300 frame animation right now. That's 10 seconds. My object, my G, is spinning at 60. 60 goes into 300 5 times, so I know that this G is going to rotate itself 5 times as I go. If my G is rotating on a number that goes evenly into the final length of my actual animation, like 60, 50, 100, 75, 150, you know it's going to loop properly. If I had set the G instead to be rotating on 90 frames, it's going to spin a little bit slower, and if you notice, as we get near the end, the G is starting to show, and when we loop back around to the beginning again, it's going to give us a really hard hit. Which is not necessarily desirable. So it's a good thing to keep in mind what your total overall loop is going to be, and then do multiples of your other items that are looping. Now what if you had a texture that is moving? You had like a cloud pattern moving through the face of an object, and you want to make sure that that loops. That's a little bit more complicated, but it's certainly doable. So we'll clear the scene right now, and I'm just going to make a really simple, boring, flat object like this. Boring object. We're going to save this guy. And we'll go back into layout, bring him in. And we're going to apply just some random procedural to him. Like so. And we'll bring up Viper so we can see what we're doing. Let's render out a version of him. Now, if we're in here and we want this to be flowing through us as if it's like a boiling cloud of smoke or something, we can animate the Z position of that actual texture. We'll add a keyframe. We'll add it at 60, and we'll just have it go 1 meter. So over 60 frames, this three-dimensional texture is going to flow through us, and we're going to see different sections of it, and it's going to look like it's kind of boiling and bubbling. We'll make a quick preview of it in Viper, and you can see it's doing this nice kind of flowy thing, but it definitely has a hit in it. This is a procedural that is completely random as it goes back. There's never a point where it repeats itself. What we're really interested in is just where it passes through this one plane where our surface is. And we want it to be moving in the z direction, towards us like this. I don't really care what it does out here, up here, out there, anywhere. I just care about in this one two-dimensional slice of space. I want it to be moving towards me. So instead of moving the position, what I'm going to do is I'm going to center the position of that cloud way over here, and then I'm going to rotate that position on the heading so that if you put the position of it far enough away out there, a rotation is going to seem like a translation in position. So it's going to feel like it's coming towards us. So let's try that. We're going to change the position. We'll make it 10 meters. Put the center of it over here. And then we're going to keyframe the heading of it. So at frame 60, we're going to go 360 degrees. 360 degrees is going to bring that same part of the texture all the way back around, and it's going to face us again. And this is going to give us the effect that we're looking for. Okay, why is it going so fast? Well, what's happening is it's doing what we want it to do. If you watch this, it's a little hard to tell, but it is actually looping. But what's happening is that this piece of texture right here has to travel from here. It has to travel all the way around, all the way over here to get back. And it's got 60 frames to do that distance. So in order to make it where it doesn't have to travel quite so far in 60 frames, we need to, instead of having the center be over here, we need the center to be here. So we're going to change the position from 10 to 1. We're going to see how that works. Make a new preview. Now you can see it moves a lot slower, but we've got a dead spot in here. What's happening is we haven't moved the center far enough. The center has to actually be off the plate that we're working with. We'll try 3. Another thing we're going to do, instead of making this a 60 frame loop, we're going to give it more time to do it. We're going to make it a 300 frame loop, which means we're going to have to increase 300 there. And now we're going to make a preview. And you can see it's starting to work a little bit closer like what we wanted to do. But we're still getting an effect where it's dead, because this is the spot that it's actually rotating around. Over here, it's coming towards us. On this part of the frame, it's actually moving away from us. So let's find out just how big of an object I made. The object is 5.65 meters from the center to the edge. So I need to be at least that far away. If I'm at 5.7 meters, then this part of the cloud that fills this part is not going to move, and this part's going to move a lot. And it's going to look strange. We want to make sure that we're far enough away that everything is moving at the same rate. So in this case, our position of 10 may have been correct, but we were trying to do it in too short of an amount of time, and it was forced to make it go far too quickly. Now here we have some good boiling. It's still faster than what we originally did. And there we go. Now we get this boiling effect. And you're never going to see a hit. It's going to just keep sitting there boiling and turmoiling and doing whatever it's supposed to be doing. This is the easiest way to make the texture loop through something. This will work for all of our stuff. If we had fractal noise or dented or anything, they're all going to work in the same general way. So you can see we have this flowing, sort of weird looking effect going on. Never have to worry about whether it's going to loop or not. It's just always going to. That's the nice thing about about rotations. Rotations, if you're doing 360 degrees, they always loop. Okay, this effect can also be applied to volumetric lights. Let's lose this object. Let's take this light here, and we're going to make it into a volumetric. We're going to rotate it so it's pointing straight up. I'm going to move it down. Okay. And now we want to apply volumetric lighting to it. Take a look and see what we're doing. Let's do a render here. Alright, we want to fill up the screen a little bit more with this guy. Increase the radius. Increase the height. Like that. And we're going to take the density down a little bit so we can see what we're doing. Maybe something like that. Now we're going to add a texture to it to give it a little bit of a smoky feel. So we'll make a nice dark color in there. So that's what it looks like. So if we render a little preview of this, nothing's going to happen because we're not animating anything. But what we would like to do is have this smoky texture rising up. So what we're going to do is we're going to apply this using world coordinates so that we know we're using the Y direction. And we could make an envelope on Y and just have it slowly come up. But we know what that's going to do. We're never going to be able to loop that. What we want to do is we want to do this rotation trick. Well, in this case, what we could do is we need to move the center of the texture off either to the side or in front and back. For this, we're going to move it back away from us. So we're going to take the center, remove it to 15 meters. Okay, so the center of our noise is going to be out here, and what's going to happen is that noise pattern is going to move down and around, and it's going to move up in front of our faces, and it's just going to keep continually moving around like this. And that's how you're going to see the same smoke pattern over and over again, and that's going to let us loop it. So we've moved it 15, and now we want to go into the rotation channel, and we're going to animate the pitch. Frame 300, we want it to go 360 degrees. And we're going to check our preview here. And as you can see right now that it feels like it's moving up. It doesn't. You don't feel that it's doing some weird roller coaster, tumbling effect. It's moving up. If we had this volumetric light tweaked just right, it would look like a fire, and it would just keep burning forever. Now, as you watch, we've got some nice flames or smoke or whatever this is, just going continuously going. Again, if you want to change the speed, you want to change two different things. The first is, how long is it taking to loop? Is it 300 frames, 600 frames, whatever? The other is, where is that center located? If you put it really far away, it's got to take that texture much, it's got to go a much longer path to come back around, so it's going to go a lot faster. The closer you get to where your texture is being seen, the shorter path it has to go. But also, the more curved it is, so the more likely you're going to see that we're actually curving. In this case, if we had the center too close to this thing, here in the front it might seem like it's going up, but then as it gets higher it'll start curving around. You'll see that it's going away from us. So you want to find that right balance of where's the center point, and it really just depends on your own scene. So you want to use Viper a lot to figure out how that speed is going to be affecting. Now, what happens if you've made your animation and for whatever reason either you didn't realize it had to loop, or you just couldn't figure out how to make it loop, or it's an older one that you have to repurpose and make it loop? What are you going to do now? You've rendered it all out. You don't want to re-render the whole thing. Well, if you have a program like After Effects, there's a really, really easy way you can force a loop. It's not quite as elegant as doing it from scratch, but it will work. So we're going to minimize Lightwave right now, and we're going to go into After Effects. This effect will also work in the toaster, in any kind of editing program you want to use. So we'll grab this 3D type no loop that I created. We're going to make a new composition for it, and let's just do a RAM preview real quick just so I can show you what it is. And this is the type that I'm using. I've got that outline effect on it, so it kind of looks cartoony. I'm not doing any cell shading on it because I wanted that gradient transition off of it, but you can see it doesn't loop. It flies in, hits, and then just kind of sits there, and then it stops again. So in order to make this loop, the easiest way to do it is to go somewhere in the middle here and then split the layer. Now what we want to do is we'll take the very back of it, we'll move it to the front, and we'll take the other part and we'll move it this way. And you make sure that there's at least some overlap here. And I tend to like to make the very end of it land on a nice even number, like in this case 6 seconds. We'll change our composition to 6 seconds, like that. And now what's going to happen is that as the animation gets nearer to the end of our composition, it's actually getting to the middle of this layer. And when we split the layer, the next frame is the first frame here. So we know that from the end of this composition, when it cycles back around to the beginning, we know that's going to loop. The tricky part is here, where it runs into itself again. What we want to do is hit T for transparency. We're going to fade this guy up. He's going to start off at completely transparent. This is the actual beginning of your animation. Not the comp, just the animation. We'll go to where the end of your animation is, and we'll fade that guy back to 100%. And now, over those few frames, you'll have the new one transitioning in over the old one. So now if we do a RAM preview, you'll see that it's going to loop nice and seamlessly. It's not quite as nice as if we had actually built a loop into it, but what are you going to do? Sometimes you have to do this. This also works really well with footage. If we try some footage here, let's grab this here. We'll make a new composition out of that. We have this guy in a boat driving down some river, and it's not going to loop, but you want to put this footage into a looping animation. All the 3D elements loop. You've already taken care of all that, but you've got this footage that doesn't loop. Well, what are you going to do? Well, you just do the same exact thing. As you can see, boom, it's going to hit. We'll go in the middle somewhere. We'll split the layer, bring this guy back to frame 1, bring this guy over, and in this case, let's have him end at 6:15. That gives us still enough of an overlap here. You don't want to overlap too much. If we, did it like this, and we did our transition over all this time, it would get kind of muddy. So we're going to end at 4:03 here. Most of what you're seeing is the actual transitioning part. And it just really shortens up the thing, and you can tell that it's a loop because it's just so short. What we really want to do is have just enough overlap so that you can tell what's going on. But you don't want to make the overlap too short, because that's going to make your transition too abrupt. You might as well just do a cut if it's too short. But you also don't want to make it too long, because then it takes too long to do it, and you're living in this mixed half and half world for far too long. So here we go. This is now at 6:10. Again, it's a little awkward because the guy is in roughly the same position as he was, but it does loop. It is a way to get around the fact that sometimes you just need to do this. And by splitting the layer and shifting them apart and just doing a transition there, it's a very quick and easy way to do this. In the toaster, for instance, you can do the same thing. You just cut the layer, swap the positions, do a crossfade, boom, you're done. That easy. Okay, well the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to put a glint pass going across your type, because it never fails that whoever is your client is going to want your type to fly in and settle and then have this nice shine go across it. Just sort of help guide the reader to read their logo. That's really what a glint pass is doing. It's just sort of calling attention to itself and making your eye go across the type and sort of forcing you, whether you want to or not, to read it. So let's do that. There's a number of different ways we can do it. How you actually do it in your job is going to depend on the entire rest of your scene and what you think looks best. And we're just going to make some type. We'll call it type because that's what it is. And we'll do a simple bevel and extrude on it. Nothing too ornate, but just enough to get the idea across. And we'll call this face. Call this bevel, and we'll call this edge. Okay, here's our type. We'll save this guy off as type. And we'll go into layout, and let's load up the type. Here we go. We'll apply our basics to it. Like so. Now, okay, so here's what our type looks like. Nothing too exciting. Let's give it a little bit of color. Like that, and we'll turn on ray traced reflections. Okay, here's our type. Now what we want it to do is, let's say we've had it just fly in. Now we want to bring some kind of sheen going over the top of it. One of the easiest ways to do it is by using an image and just bringing an image across through one of the texture channels. Right now I'm going to set it up going through the color channel because that way I can see it in OpenGL. Once I've set it up there, I'll copy it and move it into a different channel and show you how it works going through different channels. So what we want to do is we want to find an image that's basically black and then has a gradient to a white. You can make that easily enough in Photoshop. Like so. Now, move this out of the way so we can see what we're doing here. Okay. This is our type. It's not quite rotated right, so we're going to rotate it so it's mostly vertical. We don't want to repeat it, so we want to change these guys to edge, like that. So now we have one highlight going through it. If we render it, you can see you've got like this. It almost looks like the light is shining through there. Now, the easiest way that I've found to do it is to use world coordinates, and we'll just move the position over X, and you can see where it's going. This is why it's nice to do this in the color channel, because you can actually just watch it work. So we've just moved the texture off to the left hand side of it. Now we need to go to frame 60, where we're going to move it across the face of it. We'll add a keyframe there at 60, and at our frame 0 we're at negative 2.005, so the 2 meters, we should be fine. Let's see how it works. Hey, nice little glint pass running through there. Okay, now instead of using it on the color channel like this, because as you can see when I render this, we're getting black type there. One of the things we can do is we'll just temporarily turn it off, but we'll copy that layer and we'll take it, we'll put it in the luminosity channel like this. And now move this out of the way so we can see what we're doing. Now you're not going to see it, but when you render, we are going to get it. And we should even be able to see it in Viper. So that looks more like what you would expect a glint pass to look like. By going through the luminosity channel, we're making that part of it extra bright, as if a light is actually shining on it. If we didn't want to do that, let's say we didn't want to go through the luminosity, we could leave it in the color, but we could change our mode to add mode, and that should also do a similar effect. There we go. Now, by doing it this way, we control how bright that is. If we take the diffuse all the way down, we have no glint. If we bring diffuse back up, we'll still get something of a glint. But it's more affected by how diffuse the object is, which is not necessarily that realistic. But it still works. It's another way to do it. Maybe you're using the luminosity channel for something else already, and you can't use it for this effect. We can also take it off of the face. So let's copy that guy. And instead, maybe we just want to apply it to the bevel. Now this one's going to be harder to see because the bevel's smaller, but it's a little bit not quite so in your face. It's not this big old honking thing, you know, sliding past. It's just a little highlight, just getting the edges. If you like both, you know, try this. Try putting one version on the bevels. We'll put the other version over the face, but instead of going from left to right, we'll take this one and make that 2, and the other end is going to be -2. And we're going to change the rotation so it's angled the other direction as well. Now when we do it, we should have 2 glints running past each other. Although Viper is only going to show you what we're currently on. So you're not going to see both of them when you're doing it like this, but you get the idea. You get sort of crossing effects. You could even have the one that goes across the face go by really slowly, and the one that goes through the bevels go much faster. Maybe it even goes through twice. Okay, so that's how you use it if you're doing it in the surface editor. What if we don't want to do that? Because we just don't want to do that. Well, another way you can do it is by actually adding a light that is just a specular highlight. So we'll add ourselves just a little point light here, and we're going to check our properties, make sure that the effect diffuse is turned off, and we want to crank it all the way up to 100. We just want it to affect specular. Now we're going to move up, add ourselves a null like this, and parent the light to the null. Then move the light so it's off on the side, of the word. Grab our null, and after 60 frames, we're going to rotate it all around -180 degrees. Now what this should do is give us a specular highlight going across the face of our letters. Okay, so you see this is a different type of highlight. The other one was more of a bar running through it. This is a glow right through it. And this highlight is going to be directly affected by your glossiness. You set it up too high, and you're not gonna get anything. You just get a point like that. If it's too low, it's gonna blow everything out. If you want to see this in OpenGL, if you hit D for display and change your max OpenGL lights to 8, then you should be able to see it here. And right now, let's turn this down to 50, say. So as you rotate, you get a highlight. Since this is OpenGL, it's not going to be, it's not going to render exactly like this, but you can see what's happening by using a light instead of a simple texture. It's affecting everything. It's affecting the edge, it's affecting the faces, it's affecting everything, and you're getting some cool little interactions as the light goes past these areas. You get, like, look at it in here around the P. You'll see the highlight rotates around the letter, and that's kind of neat. We weren't getting that when we were just running just an image through it. You weren't getting those effects where it goes around things because it's on the back side of how the light is hitting it. So this is a little bit more realistic than doing just a bar through a texture. But you are faced with the fact that it's a specular reflection, so it's going to be this round blob in the middle of your letter. So you really want to play with how big that needs to be. Okay, well, what if you don't want to do it that way? So let's close all this stuff. We're going to get rid of that light, like that. What if you wanted to do it as a reflection of a really bright object? Well, you already saw before when we were in the surface editor for some of the other stuff, when you set the reflection options to a spherical reflection and you load, for instance, this glare streaks file, you already get these kind of glints running through it. Now, if we take this seam angle and we rotate that around, we're going to get some highlights going through it. Like so. Now again, depending on how much you want it to rotate, you're going to get different kinds of glints. In fact, we'll go negative so it goes left to right. Now this is a nice way to do it because you're getting those highlights all around everywhere. Every surface is glinting. It's maybe a little fast, but you get them all over the place. You're getting them even down in the bevels on the bottom of the P. You're getting them around there. It's just sort of, it's another way of delineating where your type is and emphasizing the shape. By having that highlight go around the P like that, you're really saying this is a curve. And I mean, duh, it's a curve, it's a P. But it looks better to your eye to be getting that highlight and that glint on there like that. Now another way to do it, if you didn't want to do it that way, because let's say you had a different image as your spherical map, let's get rid of that and let's go back to our backdrop like that. Well, another way you could do it is by taking another object and mapping something on there that you want this world to reflect. So we'll just make a quick little object here. Let's make it in a different layer. Alright, so here we have just a plate, and that's going to be our reflection object. So we'll synchronize layout and go back into it. Now where's our scene editor? Okay, here's our object. We're going to parent this guy to the null that we had been using for the light. And what we need to do is take that object and we're going to move it on Z so it's back here, like so. We need to take the null, rotate it properly. So we'll start it, it's wireframe mode. So we'll start it so the glint is off there. and then over 60 frames it's going to rotate that around. It's going to go to off here. Now, since this object, you don't really want to see it except as a reflection, you want to make sure that you change a few things under the object properties. You want to make sure you turn on unseen by camera, and you want to turn off all of the shadowing options here. That way it's not going to cast a shadow on the thing, it's not going to show up as, what is that plate flying around, you know? You're just going to see it reflected. Now we want to set up our surface here, reflection object. I'm going to turn off diffuse and just turn luminosity all the way up. And we're going to use this same image, but we want to rotate it 90 degrees on bank, like that. And again, we don't want to repeat it because it's just one thing. Okay, the object needs to be here like that. And it's going to rotate around, and it's going to be visible by our ray traced reflections. At the initial frame, you're not going to see it at all. Now, as it rotates into view, by about here we should be able to see something. And there it is. And as it goes past, we're going to see the glint out there. Now what you can do with this is you can have different images on there instead of that. What if we had the glare streaks on there? What would that look like? You get a hard edge right there, which isn't necessarily what you want, but we can control our fall off. And it's not working because our color is set to this. We want it to fall off to black. There we go. Now it's getting more of just a faded off effect. And as we rotate that around, those little shafts of light are going to chase across. Now instead of a texture in there, what if we didn't have that? What if we had just sort of some sort of procedural like this? Have it nice and bright. And as we go around, we're going to have the same issue, so we'll change our fall off again. Now we have some sort of amorphous blob affecting us. We can take that object that we've got and scale it up like this. So now as it rotates around, now that shaft is more vertical instead of just a little tight blob. It's more of a vertical effect. And what if we take this smoky texture and if we animate it? So as the thing moves past, that smoke is going to be moving through the plate, which is going to be reflecting onto the type, which means you're going to be seeing a different sort of morphy, weird, plasma-like effect on the type. Instead of animating your position, you could also just set world coordinates. That means that that plate is moving through this cloud of smoke or whatever it is, this cloud of light. And depending on where it is, you're getting a different glimpse of it, a different reflection of it. Getting the fall off just right is going to be important. It's going to give you a cool effect in the long run. And of course this object can be as big as you want. If you want, you know, a really big monster highlight, like let's put it back to our images here. You're gonna see it much earlier because the angle from the camera is going to reflect off that and hit that. We may even see it this early. You're probably just catching a bit of it there. As it comes around, it starts showing up. We can see it now. And that's just by changing the scale of it. And let me show you what this one looks like rendered out. We can't render this in Viper because it's got ray trace reflections on it, and Viper isn't quite that sophisticated yet. So we'll take this, we'll go into After Effects and see what the actual animated version looks like. Alright, so let's go into After Effects here. And this one is the version with the reflected plate with the streaks on it. Let's see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks pretty good. You're getting little reflections off the edges there, and you get a big multi-gleam paths going over the face. Yeah, works pretty good. This version is the version where it's just a single light going across, and it's different. It's a different feel to it. It's still shiny, but it's a little bit more subtle. And in fact, if we turn the light down, you would just get a barest hint of a highlight going across. There's a lot of different variations you can do on this effect, and you don't necessarily have to just turn everything up as high as you can go. Sometimes you want to be subtle. You don't want the viewer to actually realize that his eye is being drawn across the type, so you would tone it way down. In this case, we're really making a point that, like, hey, look at me, we're really glinting and we're really playing this up a whole lot. Okay, so there you go. There's some building blocks and some tips and techniques that you can use when you're building your logos. And mix and match them, use them however you want. Just make sure you know why you're using them. So until next time, I'm Rich Helvey. Thanks a lot.